young man who has stolen the show. Why don't you come on forward, Khalil, because we're going to ask you to do your tribute. And this young man who has been almost the icon for this day's celebration, as he has brought us this great remembrance of the words of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Good afternoon, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Khalil Flemming, and I'll be presenting the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech. The 1950s and 60s were a very turbulent time in America. People of color, blacks, Hispanics, and Asians were discriminated against in many ways. Black unions, churches, and other organizations such as SNCC, the SCLC, and the NAACP fought for years for desegregation and for equal rights through court cases, demonstrations, and through speeches. And it's that fight for freedom that gave birth to the civil rights movement. Now, in the 50s and 60s, acts of violence, like the vicious murder of 14-year-old Emmett Till by two white men who were later acquitted, were common in the South. Yeah. Schools were segregated in cities such as Dixie, Alabama, Little Rock, Arkansas, and Topeka, Kansas. Now, although the U.S. Supreme Court had ruled on May 17, 1954, in the Brown versus Board of Education case, that segregation of schools across America was unconstitutional, whites rioted in 1956 when Autherine Lucy was admitted to the University of Alabama. And in 1957, Governor Faubus of Arkansas mobilized the National Guard to prevent 9 black students, called the Little Rock Nine, from entering Central High. Now, despite the Supreme Court ruling, segregation continued in other public places, such as restaurants, restrooms, and on buses. So as a result, blacks continued to demonstrate. They marched and protested, non-violently, but still raising the anger of local officials who sicked water cannons and police dogs on the marchers. On August 28, 1963, Dr. King organized a massive march on Washington, D.C. In 1955, when Miss Rosa Parks was arrested for refusing to give up her seat on a bus to a white man, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., a 26-year-old Baptist minister, headed a year-long boycott of the transportation system. So again, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that the bus segregation was unconstitutional. Now, Dr. King was a driving force in the push for racial equality in the 50s and 60s. And it was on August 28, 1963, that King organized a massive march in Washington, D.C. 250,000 people had gathered for that unity march. The police were there, and they were prepared for violence, but it never came. Amen. What did come were some of the most memorable words in history. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s historic I Have a Dream speech. Amen.